And he's working very hard to get a museum going at Castle Rock, Washington, which is just a few miles from Mount St. Helens. And he can tell you a little bit more about that later. He is one of the creators of the Jonathan Park Adventure Series. He was with ICR for about 12 years. And he's a producer of the Awesome Science Media, if you remember that. So we're so honored to have him with us tonight. Let me, before I bring him up here, let's just open with prayer. I apologize for that. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for your wonderful creation. We thank you for this evening, for all the people who are gathered here to glorify your name, and for our speaker, Pat Roy. We ask your blessings on the meeting, and especially on Pat, as he talks to us about the Novarupta volcano. We pray that you open our hearts and minds to hear his message and to glorify your name. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, so I did that a little backwards, Pat, but please welcome Pat Roy.
Good evening.
Good evening.
You know, I really don't need a microphone because I always yell, so if I yell at you, it's not because I'm angry, okay? Well, listen, I am so glad to be here tonight, and I just wanted to remind you what a great resource you have that these meetings are taking place here. I've spent a lot of time talking with Jim and Judy. Do you guys know how blessed you are to have them and the meetings happening here? Let's give them just a... I know that they put a lot of work into it, and I'm so excited that you guys meet here and that you guys get to do this. It's just really amazing. Well, tonight I'm going to be sharing with you the journey to Novarupta. So basically, I'm going to be telling you a story tonight, okay? I'm a storyteller. I'm not a scientist. I'm a layperson. And as I tell the story tonight, I promise you action, adventure, scientific intrigue, and we'll even get into some romance. How's that for a creation meeting, right?
There you go.
How many times do you guys talk about romance here? So we'll be doing all of that. Well, I am a media producer. That's what I've been doing in the creation movement for about 35 years, is producing media. So tonight I'm going to share with you some media. Some of it is going to be video, but some of it is going to be audio. And it's audio drama. So a lot of times people don't know what to do with their eyes when there's just audio playing. So I guess you can probably just stare at the screen or stare at your neighbor or something like that. But it's always a little awkward when there's just audio playing. So feel free just to stare at the screen while that's going on. So people may ask, why does Pat Roy talk about Novarupta? Well, one of the lead scientists who's researched Novarupta came to me many years ago and asked me to produce a video documentary on Novarupta. And so he handed me all of his media and all the information, and we spent lots of time with him, interviewing him, and also interviewing the different explorers that went to Novarupta. We also went to a place called Lassen Park, which is in Northern California, and we actually reenacted some of the scenes of their expedition, and so that's why I know about Novarupta. It's just as a media person, just coming alongside Dr. Shorman and trying to help him get the word out about Novarupta. So that's where the information came from. Yes? What is Novarupta? That's a great question. By the end of the night, you're going to be an expert. Yeah, we're going to talk all about that. It's a volcano in the Alaskan Peninsula. By the way, when I come to a creation group to speak, since I'm a layperson, it's really hard because I realize I could talk on just about any subject in creation, and if I drop dead in the middle of it, you could literally move my body off to the side and keep the talk going because you guys know so much about creation, so it's always intimidating as a layperson to come. And so usually when I come to a group like this, I like talking about Novarupta because almost no one in the creation movement knows about Novarupta. So I hope tonight that you'll learn something new that you've never heard before. By the way, has anybody heard of Novarupta before this presentation? Ah, see, I'm right. Oh, yay! Did you know about it before I told you?
No.
I don't think so. All right, well, I'm going to also pray. I just always pray before I start a presentation, so I'm just going to pray with you, and then we'll get right into it. Dear Father, thank you so much for this group. Father, I thank you that they meet. I thank you for all the amazing ways that you are working in this group, and Father, I pray for all of us. I pray that as we learn the case for creation, that we would not just hear it, but Father, that we would also be doers and that we would go out and share it, Father. So Father, I pray for this group right here. God, I pray that you would use them in powerful ways. I just ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. Amen. Well, you guys have heard that I'm the new director at the Mount St. Helens Creation Center. I love it. It's been so much fun. We are leading excursions out to the mountain. We're building a little museum there. Somebody just donated $50,000 worth of dinosaur fossils, so we're going to be building out a paleontology room. We have homeschool workshops that are scheduled all throughout the year where homeschoolers will come in and we'll do hands-on workshop experiments with them, and then we teach them about science and even more about creation. We're going to be teaching weekly creation classes and then having all kinds of special presentations and events that are going on at the center, and so that's kind of the exciting things that are going there. I would love to have you guys come visit me. In summer, if you would like, come and take an excursion up to Mount St. Helens. We'd love to have you. It's really fun to get out and see the mountain. Well, as you guys know, Mount St. Helens happened on May 18th of 1980. I say, God, you are so incredibly powerful. By the way, it says in Psalm that he touches the fingers with touches his finger to the mountains, and they smoke. By the way, Mount St. Helens was a little tiny, beansy volcano compared to most, and yet we look at that and see the incredible power. But here's my question tonight: what if there was a volcano 30 times more powerful? And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. June 1st, 1912, earthquakes were beginning to rock a little Indian settlement of Katmai village and the surrounding 100 miles of mostly unpopulated area. Soon, families would be fleeing for their lives. Late in the evening of the 5th, observers at Cold Bay, which was 40 miles to the southwest, noted the northern sky looked black and stormy. Something was going on. Here's a little map just so it kind of gives you context of where it's at. You can see Kodiak Island. We're on the Alaskan Peninsula. By the way, if you've heard of Katmai Park, it's right there at Katmai Park. Something was starting to happen in June of 1912, and then all of a sudden on June 6th, something big took place.
I do not know whether we shall be either alive or well. We are awaiting death at any moment. Of course, do not be alarmed. A mountain has burst near here, so that we are covered in ash, in some places 10 feet and 6 feet deep. All this began on the 6th of June. Night and day we light lamps. We cannot see daylight. In a word, it is terrible, and we are expecting death at any moment. And we have no water. All the rivers are covered in ash, just ashes mixed with water. Here are darkness, hell, and thunder, and noise. I do not know whether it is day or night. Vanka will tell you all about it. So kissing and blessing you both. Goodbye.
So that was an actual excerpt from one of the native fishermen up there by the name of Ivan writing to his wife. On June 6th, the ground started to shake so violently, Kodiak Island heard the blast and saw the ash cloud from 100 miles away. It was said that darkness was so thick during the day of June 8th that you literally could not see a lantern held at arm's length. And the ash traveled all the way to Algeria, over Europe, over North America, and all the way down to well, like I said, Algeria, and so it was really quite an event. Matter of fact, the people of Kodiak Island were scared because they didn't know what was going on, and they started thinking of the stories of Vesuvius, and they were so scared that 500 of them got on a boat called the Manning, and they pulled out into the bay, and they sat out there for 2 days, unable to really move around. They didn't have water or food, and they just thought that they were ready to die. So that's what was happening with the people of Kodiak Island. The sound of the eruption traveled all the way to Juneau, which was 750 miles away. It took an hour for the sound to make it there. Isn't that incredible? An hour for the sound to travel to 750 miles. Acid rain tarnished brass as far away as Seattle. So this volcano is really starting to affect places all around the world like volcanoes do. Here's the ash drifts that covered the Katmai village from the eruption. So a lot happened, but the volcano was kind of remote, so not everybody was sure what had happened. But it wasn't until a few years later that the National Geographic magazine sent in a team of explorers led by a Christian man by the name of Dr. Robert Griggs.
Today I saw a sight no human being has ever laid eyes on. A region in the great Alaskan wilderness laid bare by a volcanic eruption. The utter devastation will make further exploration difficult. My team and I are running low on supplies. This evening I have left base camp alone to do some scouting. I have not seen an animal or any living creature since entering the blast zone. Tomorrow we hope to send an expedition out from the base camp to find Novarupta. I'm overwhelmed by the amazing power of one volcano to completely change the entire landscape. We've pitched our tent away from the danger of avalanche from the rocks rolling up the mountains around us. This is such a harsh environment. I know danger is a constant concern, but we're determined to press on. I hope the words on the pages of this journal inspire future generations to explore this amazing place.
So Dr. Robert Griggs actually led 3 expeditions from 1915 to 1919. Here's an actual picture of some of his men. By the way, they faced pumice storms, they crossed dangerous rivers, just amazing winds, just all kinds of dangers that these men faced. It was an actually amazing adventure that they were on. Here's one of their men, and you can tell he's up to his knees there. Now, during the 1916 expedition, Dr. Robert Griggs, one of his men was Folsom, and he and Folsom decided to head out and explore an area that they hadn't seen before. Well, along for the expedition was another man by the name of Church. And Church, they had just had a pancake breakfast, and Church ate way too many pancakes. So he decided to stay behind and let Griggs and Folsom go out and see what they could discover.
Should we proceed further, Griggs?
Church is probably wondering if we've been dispatched.
Poor Church, incapacitated by too many pancakes.
Well, at least we had someone to stay back and watch our gear.
I must say that I have been utterly surprised by the lack of volcanic activity that I thought would be manifesting itself in such short order after such a grand eruption.
I would agree, Folsom. Okay, I think we need to get back to where Church is waiting.
All right. The steam we thought we were pursuing has shown itself to be nothing more than clouds.
Wait! Folsom, what do you see down there in the floor of the path?
It appears to be a miniature volcano jetting steam.
I'm not going to reveal that you are correct.
What do we do now?
I feel we owe it to Church to turn back. We'll return with him. Okay, follow me back.
Yes, sir. What's wrong, sir?
When I turned back at you, I couldn't help but stare down the valley.
Look, more steam.
I know Church is waiting for us, but he can wait a little longer. Folsom, follow me.
Wow! Folsom, look what we've discovered. The valley started with hundreds.
Thousands.
Could it be 10,000?
Oh, fumaroles. It looks as if all the steam engines of the world have been assembled together and have popped their safety valves at once and are letting off a surplus of steam in concert.
Griggs, we need to get down there and have a closer look.
Let's go.
So that was one of their biggest discoveries, is finding the Valley of 10,000 Smokes. Here's a quote from Dr. Griggs. The whole valley, as far as the eye could reach, was full of hundreds, no, thousands, literally tens of thousands of smokes curling up from its fissured floor. The first glance was enough to assure us that we had stumbled onto another Yellowstone park, unseen and unsuspected by white man and native alike until this hour. I tried to keep my head and observe carefully, yet I exposed 2 films from my one precious roll in trying for pictures that I should have known were impossible. It was as though all the steam engines in the world assembled together had popped their safety valves at once and were letting off surplus steam in concert. Here's a little video of them actually at one of the fumaroles. Here they are taking the temperature of a fumarole. Okay, you guys ready to see Novarupta? Ta-da! Now when I first saw this, I went, wait, that's the volcano? Well, kind of unimpressive, right? But I'm going to tell you why later. I remember when Dr. Sharman was telling me about Novarupta, I was so excited. When I saw what it looked like, I went, wait, this doesn't really look like a volcano, really. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. By the way, Robert took his wife Laura along. Can you imagine that? So there she is along for the expedition. Now I look at this picture and I realize tonight it kind of looks like they switched hats. Don't know what the story is with that. Doesn't it kind of look like she's wearing her hat and vice versa? Here's one of the base camps that they had during one of their expeditions. Now Dr. Griggs in his book tells an amazing story. One night they were set up in their base camp and all of a sudden the wind blew harder and harder and harder, and as they were inside their tents, pretty soon the pumice, which were like little knives, got thrown at the tent, and pretty soon it started ripping their tent apart from all the pumice that was just pelting the canvas. And pretty soon their equipment was starting to blow away, and a lot of their supplies, and in the middle of the night, they decided that they were going to run down the canyon to try and find a place to shelter from the wind, and they left all of their stuff behind. Now, as they were running down, Griggs was in front of everybody, and some wind came along and actually picked Griggs up and carried him down the valley, and he landed on a slope of pumice and landed just fine. Can you imagine being in the middle of the night, being picked up by the wind, and actually set down in the pumice? Quite a deal. Here's their camp after that. You can tell that it was quite a deal. Okay, so now if you're out in the wilderness like this camping, how do you cook your food? Is it a camp stove that you use? No, you just use one of the fumaroles. So there they are, actually cooking one of their meals. Well, here's one of the major discoveries they made. A landslide triggered by earthquakes during the 1912 eruption dammed the Katmai River and Katmai Canyon. The Katmai River remained dammed for 3 years until a heavy snow melt in 1915. The dam was breached and an enormous flood broke out into the Katmai Canyon and released enough water to move 33 million cubic yards of material in a matter of hours. Wow. We always hear the story of how the little river cut the canyon, right? In fact, we as creationists all the time, we talk about the breached dam theory for different things that we see. And well, it happened right there at Katmai, and they were able to observe that going on there. Here's from Dr. Griggs. I found the countryside ravaged by a great flood whose waters were just subsiding. So again, this is a breached dam theory that we actually saw with our own eyes, right? Pretty neat. Trees were snapped off near ground level for several miles by the violent impact of the water. A fan of huge boulders were deposited at the mouth of the canyon, and the volume of water was so great that it flooded the valley to a depth of approximately 10 feet. So here we've got catastrophic processes doing things that people normally attribute to being long periods of time. And yet we see it happening very rapidly. Well, Dr. Griggs and his team did a great job. Matter of fact, the president of National Geographic Society said this: their intrepid, intelligent, and faithful services achieve results of historic value and reflect great credit on all participants. So they did a wonderful job. Dr. Griggs put his research into this book. The Valley of 10,000 Smokes by Dr. Robert Griggs. You can find that if you would like. There's actually a PDF online if you would like. You can download it for free and you can read it if you would like. Okay, are you guys ready to time travel with me? I know I told you that we were going to do romance here at the Creation Club. Have you guys ever done time travel before? Okay, here we go. Ready? We're going to time travel right now. 100 years into the future. This is Dr. David Shorman. Dr. David Shorman has his Bachelor's of Science in Aerospace Engineering. He has a Master of Science in Marine Chemistry. He has a PhD in Limnology. Who knows what that is? What is that?
Study of lakes.
Yes, very good. He's the founder of Dive Interactive Education, and most of all, he's an explorer. He loves to go out and explore. As a matter of fact, he would take family and friends all the time into the Katmai area, and they would go salmon fishing. And so these guys had hiked a lot of remote wilderness. They had learned to survive out there. And one time they were out on a salmon trip, and they came across the visitor center. And while they were in there, Dr. Shorman found Dr. Griggs' book. And he began reading it, and he said, wow, this has got some serious creationist implications. And they began to think, instead of going on expedition salmon fishing, what if I go back to the volcano? And so in 2009, he put together a team of his friends, and here they are. This is his son, Kenny, okay? And Joel, and then the man in the back there is Mike. Next to him is his son, who recently broke his back, by the way. That's Joel. And then Tommy is right here. So these are the team of guys that they put together. Here again is a map of where they were going. Now, the only way to get to Katmai National Park is by boat or float plane, right? You don't fly into the airport there. You have to take a little float plane. They broke up into two teams. Dr. Shorman and his son, Kenny, decided to go first, and then one day behind them was the rest of the team. The rest of the team had something else to do, and they just figured that they would meet up. So they spent their first night at Brooks Lodge. Now, Brooks Lodge, you probably recognize this picture. Have you ever seen the picture with the bear with his mouth open, and the salmon is like jumping into his mouth? Okay, that's Brooks Lodge, all right? So they spent their first night at Brooks Lodge. Their second night, they spent them at the Buttress Mountains, and their goal was to make it to these beautiful USGS cabins that are not too far away from Novarupta, so that's where they're headed to. Now here's Kenny crossing the river. Now, when I talked to Kenny, he said that his least favorite part of the trip was crossing rivers. Now, this is kind of a mellow river, but he hated crossing rivers because sometimes the water was moving so fast and the cliffs were so high that they were afraid that they would fall into the river and get swept down the river very quickly. Plus, you'll notice that Kenny's using a stick. Why was he using a stick? Drop-offs. Yeah, I heard somebody say that. There was a lot of drop-offs, right? So they were a little bit nervous about crossing those rivers. Was Dr. Shorman, a limnologist, was crossing these rivers, he was thinking about the stream power law. This equation is used by many scientists to determine the age of a stream or river. It takes into account the rate of erosion, the hardness of the material the stream is flowing through, the size of its drainage area, and the slope of the water flowing. Supposedly, using this equation, scientists can figure out how long a river has been cutting through its riverbed. Okay, scientists do that all the time, right? They see a river and they use the stream power law to try and figure out the age of the canyon that it's flowing through. Well, there at Novarupta, as they were headed out, Dr. Shorman was reading the journal of Dr. Griggs, and Dr. Robert Griggs discovered that the River Lethe had cut 100 feet through the canyons in 5 years. So that's a rate of 20 feet per year, right? You with me on the map there? However, the rate is nowhere near that, right? When Dr. Shorman was there looking at the erosion, it slowed way down. Well, if I was a uniformitarianist, somebody who believes that things happen very slowly and gradually over a long period of time, if I had showed up to the river and used the stream power law, I would have come to the wrong conclusion, right? Because there was a catastrophe in the past in which that canyon was cutting much quicker than it is today. Very interesting. I forgot to tell you about Dr. Shorman and Kenny. They actually had superpowers. No, I'm just kidding. That's pumice, right? Very light. All right, so there they are having a good time with pumice. Do you want to see what it looks like to have a bad time with pumice? Okay, so they told me the story. Now, you notice they're sitting up. They told me what usually happened is that they would be hiking and they would hear something up above them that sounded like a freight train. And what they realized was it was a pumice storm coming. They realized it was a pumice storm coming, and they realized that they probably had about a minute or two to get flat down on their face, cover everything, cover all the equipment, and they would just lay in the pumice until the storm went past them, and then they would get back up and start walking for a little while, and then all of a sudden they'd hear the freight train again. So they had to do that the entire way out to the cabins. By the way, I mentioned that they were going to the USGS cabins, right? Now, I know you guys have maybe stayed in some pretty fancy lodges before, but I wonder if you've ever stayed in something this fancy. Here you go, here's the interior of those lovely cabins. Great, so Dr. Shorman and Kenny arrived at the cabins there that night. But that night, the rest of the team was back at the Buttress Mountains. Okay, so remember that they were going to meet up with each other. Now, as they stayed here, they pitched a tent along the Buttress Mountains and they were sleeping. And that night, guess what happened? A bunch of wind started coming through. And it kept getting harder and harder and stronger and stronger. And Tommy, of course, was thinking about what happened to Dr. Griggs. And he's getting nervous that their tent is just going to blow away with them in it, right? So Tommy, the whole night, he said he didn't sleep a bit. He just stayed up the whole night praying, "Dear Lord, please keep our tent on the ground." And the Lord answered, and he actually did. Okay, so the next morning, Dr. Shorman and Kenny actually headed to Novarupta, and there they are, actually arriving at the Novarupta event. Here's another picture of what that looks like. All right, so Dr. Shorman had always heard about Dr. Austin's dating project. Remember how Dr. Austin pulled a piece of dacite out of Mount St. Helens and sent it off to a lab and had it dated, and you remember it came out to be, 340,000 to a couple million years. Dr. Shorman wanted to repeat the same thing, so he picked out a piece of rhyolite from the dome there, and the eruption was 1912. They got the sample on their 2009 trip, but then they sent it to the lab in 2012. He wanted to do it on the 100th year anniversary of the eruption. So it was exactly 100 years. He sent it to the New Mexico Geochronology Lab, and they dated it using the argon method. Anybody guess what the date was? 5.5 million years old. How old was the rock? 100 years. There seems to be a little bit of a problem there, right? In fact, we see that over and over again at several different places where we have rocks dated at known age and they turn out to be wrong. And so this was just another example of that happening there at Novarupta. In fact, if it was 100 years old and it was 5.5 million years old, dated at 5.5 million years, that's orders of magnitude off. Incredibly wrong. Okay, after going to Novarupta, they met the other team back at the cabins again, so there they are at the cabins. The first thing they did the next morning is they headed back out to the Novarupta event again with the whole team. So here's the question. By the way, there's Novarupta in its full glory right there. Yeah. Again, it kind of looks different from things that I'm used to seeing when I think of volcano. So here's the question. What exactly happened during the eruption? Now this is a picture of Mount Katmai. Mount Katmai is 6 miles east of Novarupta. And this was the actual volcano. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon on June 6, 1912, some of the material began to erupt from Mount Katmai, the actual volcano. Under the extreme pressure, the material began to blow out of a lower vent, Novarupta. Okay, so Katmai is erupting, and then 6 miles away, some starts to pop out of this vent, okay? As the pressure was relieved from underneath Katmai, the top of this mountain, Katmai, collapsed, and then all of a sudden it backed up, and then Novarupta began to erupt. That's why when we look at it, it doesn't look like a volcano, right? because it was just a place where all of a sudden all of the pressure popped out. Okay, so the eruption took place in 60 hours, which have been divided into 5 different episodes, so I thought I would go through those real quick with you. Episode 1 lasted for 16 hours and accounted for 70% of the material that would be ejected from the volcano. Okay, episode 2, excuse me.
Say that again, how many?
16 hours
Okay.
and 70% of the material. Okay, during this episode, it deposited 9 distinct deposits, filling the valley of 10,000 smokes. Okay, so you see a similar thing at Mount St. Helens, right? All that landslide material came down, and so it filled up the valley there. There were flows moving at speeds of 450 miles per hour. It began with rhyolite material and eventually began releasing dacite. It was about 6 hours into the episode when Mount Katmai collapsed, releasing the mud flows, ash, and hydrothermic rock matrix. During the first 11 hours of the eruption, there was 567 tons of material ejected from Novarupta's vent every second. That's some serious material coming out. At the end of episode 1, there was a short pause of a few hours. Episode 2 was a plinian eruption, shooting upward, shooting gas and dacite material high up into the air. Although there were earthquakes throughout the entire eruption, the largest one took place during episode 2, hitting 7.0 on the Richter scale. It blew out almost 3 cubic miles of material, which covered an area of 3,000 square miles. So that's episode 2. This event also caused pyroclastic density currents, waves of fast-moving gas-carrying rock that shot downward and depositing layers of material. So here's this wave of gas that just shoots down, carrying all the material. As the gas begins to dissipate, it begins to skip, just leaving layer after layer as it's going along. Episode number 3. After a short break, episode 3 shot another 6/10 of a cubic mile of material straight up into the air to fall back, creating even more layers. It also shot out more waves of gas and material. This episode ended as the material built up around Novarupta's vent, and it formed a dome which plugged the volcano. So that was episode number 3. Episode number 4 blew out the plug and deposited even more material around the vent. And then finally, episode number 5 was another dome building event which replaced the dome and ended the eruption. So that's what took place on that day. Well, as you know, we read in the scriptures in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. So like many volcanoes, Novarupta was releasing lots of water. And so it's thought that that water, which was in the volcano, was also mixing with the magma, and it was producing the super hot, I guess, matrix, and the water was entering the supercritical phase. The critical point for water is 705.2 degrees Fahrenheit, with a pressure of 3,191 pounds per square inch. At high pressures and temperatures like this, water no longer acts like a liquid or a gas, it's something in between. Near this critical point, it becomes very corrosive and can actually eat through rock. And so the question is, maybe the corrosiveness of this supercritical water is actually what ate away at Katmai and actually caused it to collapse during the eruption. Think about this. All of the ejection of all these materials, the rapid layering, everything that was going on, the supercritical water cutting through rock, all of those were probably processes that were going on during the worldwide flood. And again, when it comes to Novarupta, even though it's a larger volcano than Mount St. Helens, it shows just these catastrophic forces that could have been going on during the flood. Okay, so they spent their next days taking day trips. They climbed Mount Katmai. They explored some glaciers. They also visited the original base camp of Dr. Robert Griggs, and they also came to a place called Baked Mountain. Now, Baked Mountain, they actually climbed. It's 3,500 feet, 1,000 feet above the valley. What do you think was on top of that mountain? Well, that's good. But what else do we always find on mountaintops? Rocks. Good, good, good. Something else. Well, I heard somebody say, did you say fossils? Yes, what type of fossils? Marine fossils, right? So just once again, here we find another place, we're on top of these mountains, we're finding marine fossils, right? Well, it just reminds us 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail and the mountains were covered. So when we find stuff like that, we just go, that's consistent with the worldwide flood. So here they are, just having some fun. All right, so we've talked about volcanoes, we've talked about eruption, we've talked about action, we've talked about adventure, but what have I forgot? Romance. This is Ashley. Ashley lived in Hawaii, and Ashley and Kenny were actually dating. And Kenny was starting to feel that maybe she was the one. Now on the trip, they had a satellite phone, okay, for emergencies. And what they told Kenny was, Kenny, you're going to take care of the satellite phone, and the satellite phone only had so many minutes on it, right? So what the rest of the team didn't realize was that Kenny was sneaking out during the evenings and when everybody else was busy, and he was using the satellite phone and calling Ashley in Hawaii and just telling them about how the adventure was going. Well, he eventually used up all of the minutes on their satellite phone. And he didn't tell the rest of the team, of course, until after they were all done. But if they had gotten in some kind of trouble, they would have found out right away that he had wasted all those minutes talking to Ashley. Okay, so eventually their trip was done. They had accomplished what they had hoped to do, and so they began heading back, and there they are crossing over one of the little rivers that you find out there. As they crossed the River Lake, they were surrounded by the layers deposited by the eruption. Many of these layers are known as valley-filling ignimbrites, and ignimbrite is the term for when a volcanic material like rhyolite is trapped in hot gases as they rapidly flow outward from the eruption. Rhyolite never forms lava-like flows like the basaltic flows of Hawaii. You know, everybody likes eruptions where you've got rivers of lava, right? So that wasn't taking place here. But when hot rhyolite magma dissolves into water and sun flashes to steam, the whole mass undergoes instant expansion like a bomb. This matrix shot out of the vent, forming a ground-hugging story of hot gas, vapor, and ash that were flowing at incredible speeds and spread over incredible distances. In some places along the River Lake, these 9 ignimbrite packages are actually over 100 feet thick. So it's just depositing just major material. Some of these materials were so hot the particles were actually melted together, which is called welded ignimbrite. Okay, the other deposits were fall deposits. They're composed of ash and pumice, mainly from Novarupta, but they also include a special deposit called a HEPI deposit. That stands for High Energy Proximal Ignimbrite. HEPIs are a type of pyroclastic density flow formed after superheated clouds of gas and ash collapse on themselves and rush across the surrounding valley and mountains. HEPI deposits blanket everything in their path with thin layers that frequently stack up to several feet in thickness. It's amazing to know that such finely layered deposits can be formed so rapidly. So we see that at Mount St. Helens as well. We see these fine layers that were formed in a matter of 3 hours. And then here at Novarupta, we see the same thing. We see these amazing processes just creating these layers very rapidly. Again, if I was a uniformitarianist and I didn't know about the volcano and I came and explored those layers, I would probably say, well, those took very long periods of time. Well, things like Novarupta and Mount St. Helens have literally made it that we no longer have to claim that those processes take millions of years, right? We see it happening very quickly. So that's one of the important things about volcanoes like Novarupta. Okay, so anyway, the guys continued back. And eventually they got back to Brooks Lodge again. So here they are with Brooks Lodge, and you can see the ranger there. They decided to take a little field trip out to a place called Yucca Falls. And then there's Yucca Falls. The Naknek Formation, okay, so this is the Naknek Formation that you see here at Yucca Falls. The Naknek Formation stretches from the Alaskan Range in the east all the way past the Pribilof Islands in the Bering Sea, which is over 1,000 miles. And in some places, this deposit is more than 14,000 feet thick. So this is a huge deposit that you find all around that area. This deposit is said to be composed mostly of eroded coastal sediments mixed with a considerable volume of volcanic debris. So we've got sediments and volcanic material that are mixed together. The Naknek is a sediment gravity flow. Okay, so with the volcano, we see these gas dissipating and dropping the material. But with sediment gravity flows, we see similar things happening with water and material. In the sediment gravity flow, the entire mass of particles and liquid behaves as a single fluid. The amount of material that can be moved by these flows shows its catastrophic nature. So anyway, as Dr. Shorman was looking at this Naknek formation, he came away convinced that this was a deposit put there by the worldwide flood. And there's great evidence of that. As a matter of fact, we even find marine fossils within this layer. And so Dr. Shorman came away convinced that this massive layer that we see was actually from Noah's flood itself. Well, after going on the hike, they spent one more night, and then the next day they headed out on a seaplane, and that was their expedition in 2009. Okay, I'm going to run through one more expedition really quickly, may I? Because we weren't done at that point. Dr. Shorman got home and he began to think, and you know, they went to a place, a part of Novarupta that many people have gone before since Dr. Griggs, but there's a side of Novarupta that no human has been since Dr. Griggs. And he said, I want to go back to that area, and I want to explore, and I want to find out about the biblical worldview, the biblical history, and see if I can find layering that shows that whole biblical history there. So I'm about to show you a picture of them heading out on their 2011 expedition, and I want to ask you, who's sitting in the seat next to Kenny? Romance. So there they are. This time it was just the three of them. Dr. Shorman, Kenny, and Ashley were the ones that were headed back this time. By the way, interesting little fact, Ashley had never even been on a camping trip before. Now, question to you, if you've never been camping, is a great first camping trip to go out into a wilderness where you have to fight all the elements and where man has not been for 100 years?
No.
It's probably not a really good place to go, but you know, I love Ashley's attitude that she was like, let's go. By the way, when I've talked to her, that's kind of her attitude in life, is let's do this. So there they are getting on the plane. Kenny proposed to Ashley and they were married in August no, I don't have the year. Just before, the year before, they were married in Kauai. So this was kind of almost like a little bit of a honeymoon for them. So again, Dr. Shorman's goal was to demonstrate the creation, flood, ice age, and the present eruptions. He wanted to find that pattern in the rocks. And that was all based on his biblical history. So to accomplish this, they would spend 4 days exploring Katmai Valley, Mount Katmai itself, and then Noisy Mountain. So that's where they were headed out to. Okay, so interesting story. There is Katmai Lake there, which is a smaller lake, and then a ways from that, out kind of in the wilderness where a lot of people have been, is another lake called Lake Dakavac. Now, Lake Dakavac is big enough for a seaplane to take off, because remember, a seaplane loaded with a bunch of gear needs a little bit of a runway, and the pilot had determined that Katmai was way too small for him to make a takeoff, and so the plan was to drop them off at Lake Dakavac, and then they were going to explore, and then eventually on a certain day and time, 4 days later, they were going to meet back at Lake Dakavac again. Matter of fact, Dr. Shorman told his wife that they were going to be landing at Lake Dakavac, and they had a little tracker with them, and both his wife and his young daughter could watch the computer screen back home and actually see where they were traveling. Well, just before they got to land, the pilot said, you know, actually, without you guys and your equipment, I can probably take off from Katmai Lake, so we're actually going to land in Katmai Lake instead of Lake Dakavac. And so they landed in Katmai Lake, and that's where they started their expedition. Well, back home, they were watching the tracker on the computer screen, and Dr. Shorman's wife is saying to the daughter, oh, honey, they're off course already. And then the little daughter asked, I wonder if a bear got him and ate the tracker. And so for the full 4 days, they were watching the little tracker moving around. wondering if it was a bear that ate the tracker. So they asked the pilot, they said, "Sir, how do we get from Katmai Lake to Lake Dakavac?" And the pilot said, "Are you kidding? Nobody's ever done that before." So there was no route, there was no path. They tried to check maps. There was no maps drawn of the area to tell them how to do that. Of course, there was no trails, and they really didn't know how they were going to get back, but they just adventured out anyway. I loved it. So here's Kenny and Ashley. They came to the same place Dr. Briggs had been when he documented the natural dam that carved Katmai Canyon. So there they are, standing in that canyon. And you can see the 400-foot deep canyon left behind by the powerful forces. And then what's running through the canyon?
Water.
Right. So which comes first, the river or the canyon?
Canyon.
Well, sometimes it can be the river maybe, but what we found in a lot of catastrophic events is that the catastrophe happens, it carves the canyon, and then the river takes the path of least resistance. It's kind of the opposite thinking of how many uniformitarianists think all of the time, right? So they actually did document the biblical history in the rocks there. So you can see the Naknek. Remember I said Naknek was probably a flood deposit. On top of that, they found glacial till. And then on top of that, they found the materials ejected by Novarupta. So there you go, right there at Novarupta, we've got the biblical history told in the rocks. Well, one of the days they decided that they were going to actually climb Mount Katmai. But as they were about to do that, Kenny looked down at Ashley's boots and her feet, and he noticed that they weren't doing so well. Now, those of you who go out and hike all the time, what do you do with your boots before you go out on a hike?
Break them in.
You break them in. Nobody told Ashley that. She was wearing brand new boots, and it was just ripping her feet apart. And so both Dr. Shorman and Kenny said, "Ashley, you can't go up Mount Katmai." And she goes, No, I can do it. And they said, "Well, no, you better not." And so they decided not to climb Mount Katmai. Dr. Shorman went off and explored a glacier called Princess Glacier, and Kenny and Ashley headed back to the camp, but to get to camp, they had to cross a river.
Completely different section of the river than we crossed before.
I know, but look how much narrower it is here. I'm willing to give it a try.
I'll do it. I want to get back to camp and get warm and out of these boots.
Me too. Okay, make sure to use your poles. I don't want you falling into any pits. Okay. Let's go together. 1, 2, 3. Oh wow, that's really cold.
I didn't think it was possible, but somehow it's even cooler than last time.
Let's get across fast.
Okay. I'm in above my waist. Kitty, oh please, I can't make it across this.
It's so deep, and the current's running too fast. Don't let it wash you downstream. Here, grab a handle. Let's get back to shore.
I feel the weight coming out of me. It's hard to breathe.
Me too, but come on. We can make it back together. Come on, together. We can do this. We're going to take just a little further.
Kenny, I can't feel my legs anymore. Can you?
No, but don't think about it. We're almost back to shore. Come on, 3 more steps. 2, okay. I'll go to the back.
I'm so tired.
Me too. Let's rest for a second, and then we need to find another spot to cross.
So that's exactly what they did, is they worked their way down the river and found a place where that they could cross, and then they headed back to their camp. Well, that was the days of exploration that they had done. They had documented the flood, ice age, and current deposits from Novarupta. They had done some exploring, taken lots of pictures and that type of stuff, and it was time to head back. So the morning that they were meeting the plane at Dakavac, they had to get up very early. Matter of fact, they were meeting the plane, I think, in the afternoon. They had to get up very early, and they had to make their way back to the lake. But remember, no human had ever done that before. So they set out as they were hiking to try and find their way to Dakavac Lake. They hiked and they hiked and they hiked, and for hours they had been hiking, and eventually they got into a place where the trees were so thick that they were trying to push their ways through the trees. And they said that it was just incredibly time-consuming because you would pull a tree back and you would squeeze through with all of your backpack and equipment, and then they would get to the next tree and they would squeeze through, and it just took them hours and hours and hours just to go to a short distance. And after doing all of that, they realized that they had been on a ridge that dead-ended in cliffs, and they realized that they had to turn around and go all the way back. Well, things were getting a little dire because they were calculating the time, and they didn't think that they were going to make it back in time, and they were starting to run low on supplies, plus the plane was going to be there, and what would the plane do if they weren't there at that time? They would miss their flight back, right? Maybe even reported missing or something. And so they knew they had to get there. So after they got back from the ridge, almost all the way back to where they had started for the day, they turned around and sat out again to try and find a way to Dagadak Lake. So they hiked and they hiked and they hiked, and the story has a happy ending because they actually made it to the lake literally an hour before the plane was supposed to meet them there. So that is the stories of the expeditions to Novarupta. Novarupta, like Mount St. Helens, shows that layers can be created very rapidly. It shows that canyon systems can be carved very rapidly. The dating of the rock shows that their dating methods are wrong. And basically what it shows is that none of these things are millions of years old, but actually can happen very rapidly. Well, when we talk about a worldwide flood, we realize that the processes happening there were very rapid as well. Layers that are claimed to be millions of years, we no longer need to believe that. Canyon systems, we don't need to believe that. And so as Christians, the fun thing is, we read God's Word, and we can see when you add up all the chronologies and do the math, that it comes out to 6,000 years, and we realize that we can trust God's Word. And think about this. Radioisotope dating is often used to prove the age of rocks. And usually when I'm with a group of people that believe in an old Earth, I'll say, give me all of your evidences for an old Earth. And they'll say things like the age of the rocks, the age of the layers, the age of the fossils, which are usually dated by the layers that they're in, right? When you take away radioisotope dating, there's not much proof for an old Earth. But there are a lot of scientific evidences for a young Earth. And that's why I love Novarupta and why I love Mount St. Helens. Well, so what did they learn from their trip? I'll actually let them tell you.
I think if others were to have the same experience as we did in Novarupta, I think that it would strengthen their relationship with God as far as being able to be out in creation and see His power and see that the evidence of what He says really is true, and that just there's something about being out there that I think you put a lot of trust in Him, and just it really draws you closer to Him.
Yeah, I think after hiking through Novarupta, things that I've learned that'll help me in the future is to have patience and to just trust yourself and trust God and know that He's in control, and that you don't need to worry about the little things, that if you trust that it will all work out and it'll all be okay.
I think it's important for Christians to know about Novarupta because it's a great example of the power of God. And we read in Matthew 22:29, Jesus told the Sadducees, He told them because they did not know Scripture very well and they did not know the power of God. And so, we need to study Scripture, but we also need to study His creation and get to know Him better that way. And so it's just an incredible testimony. The biggest eruption in over 100 years now, and there's just so much power that goes with an event like that, and that can only be possible by a more powerful being in charge of all of that.
So there you go, the actual explorers. By the way, as you can hear, we made an audio drama out of this. We made a trilogy. It's a 3-episode stories based on the actual expeditions that took place, and then we put them together in a series of audio dramas. And Jim and Judy actually will have that at the back table there. Sales go to your group here, so I just wanted to let you know that those are back there. If you like listening to audio dramas while you drive, just there'll be a chance for you to actually hear a lot of the details that I was unable to tell you about tonight, and it's all done in a dramatic form, and so it's kind of fun to listen to. You know, it is 8 o'clock. I guess we have got a little bit of time for questions and answers. Remember, I'm a lay person. I'm a media producer. So if you ask me all about high density flows and all that stuff, I'm going to say, hey, I'll tell you what, why don't you read Dr. Shorman's work? By the way, you can find that. If you Google Dr. Shorman ICC paper, Dr. Shorman actually took his research and published it in a peer-reviewed article, and you can actually find that online, and you can download it, and you can read it. Likewise, you can also find Dr. Robert Griggs' book, Valley of 10,000 Smokes. And so that's a huge book, but if you want to, you can actually read about the adventures of Dr. Robert Griggs. So there's a lot of reading that you can do if you'd like to follow up on this. I'm excited because nobody in the creation movement really knows about Novarupta, and so I'm glad that you guys know the story now. Now what I hope is you turn around and use the information to bless others. Okay, so back to Q&A. If you ask a highly technical question, I'm going to say, boy, that sure is a great question. I wish I knew the answer to that. But I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you have. I can tell you more about the expedition if you would like. I can tell you about Mount St. Helens and what's going on with that. So if anybody has any questions, let's, yes?
Pat, you said something, and I'm hard of hearing, but you were talking about some kind of a formation that went as far as the Pribilof Islands. I've been to the Pribilof Islands.
Right, it's the Naknek Formation.
It's a what?
Naknek is what it's called. N-A-K-N-E-K. And it's a 14,000 foot deep formation. And Dr. Shorman believes that that is a deposit from the worldwide flood. And it contains all kinds of marine fossils. And it looks like a catastrophic deposit. So he believes that that was the from the worldwide flood. And then on top of that, we see glacial till, which tells us about the ice age, right? In fact, we as creationists believe that the worldwide flood left the oceans warm, and then that actually threw the earth into an ice age, right? And so we see glacial till on top of the flood deposits, and then on top of that, we see the deposits from Novarupta. Yes?
Was Dr. Shorman a Christian before he began?
Yes, definitely, yeah. He's been a creationist all the way through. Yeah. Yes?
Is the Magnadome still is it active right now up there?
The Lava Dome, I believe that there's still some events that are going on there. So I guess I equate that to kind of like Mount St. Helens. Mount St. Helens erupted, right? And then it's the goal of the mountain to rebuild itself, right? So I imagine there at Novarupta, there's still got to be activity there, but there has not been another major event like what took place in 1912.
Well, what about the valley there, the valley of 10,000?
Yeah, that's calmed down a lot. You saw all those fumaroles and you saw all the steam rising from that. That has all pretty much calmed down. In fact, I heard from Dr. Shorman that while they were out there, they could find some vents that were still venting a little bit, but for the most part, all of that had died down. Yeah. Yes?
Yeah, I'd be interested in hearing about what you have going at Mount St. Helens. That would be possible to see if one were to go there.
Yeah, that's a great question. So during the summers, because remember, during the winter it's closed. So during the winter, we're doing a lot of in-house things. We're doing a lot of workshops and special presentations. But usually starting about May and going all the way through till about the end of October is prime time season to go up to Mount St. Helens itself. The center leads 3 basic excursions. One is on the west side of the volcano. That's a full-day trip. And basically what we do is we go through and we look at the lahars, the mud flows, and the damage that's been done with that. We take a look at the hummocks. Hummocks are formations that were made by the landslide. We actually look at the landslide. We go on a hike and hike through the hummocks there, and we look at the canyon. And so that's what we do on the west side tour. On the east side tour, we go to to Spirit Lake. And we hike down to Spirit Lake. Again, that's a full day journey that we take there. And then we also lead tours to the south side And when we're on the south side, a lot of times we're talking about the eruption from 2,500 years ago. This next summer, we're going to plan a lot of different things. If you're interested, our website is mshcreationcenter.org. I hope that by next summer, I'm planning to have some family camps where people can come and actually do all 3 excursions, and we all stay together at a campground in the area there. We're also probably going to do some summiting trips. We're actually going to go up to the top of Mount St. Helens. So we've got different things going like that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but lots of exciting things going on there. So if you're interested, if you guys do Facebook, we have a web page, a Facebook page, of course, MSH Creation Center, and that's probably the best place. I'm always making announcements on that page about what we'll be doing. So again, lots of stuff going on this winter, but you want to come in the summer when we can actually go out to the mountain. In fact, we've got a little museum that we built there. And people come through and look at the displays, and I always say, hey, the best display ever is like just a few miles that way, right? Which is the mountain. So you definitely want to come and see the mountain. Yes?
How is what you're doing there being funded? Just curious.
Yeah, you know, it's just people giving donations. It's people that have usually been on excursions themselves, and they see the value of it, and then they just start giving monthly to the center there. Now, this winter, we're going to be doing a lot of homeschool workshops and a bunch of other classes and seminars. We're charging registration for that, so that will help a little bit. But for the most part, it's just people that believe in the mission that we've got there that are giving to what we're doing. Yeah, so it's pretty exciting. Yes?
You know, the rapid carving out of those canyons and
Yes.
volcanoes, does that give any idea on the timeline for carving out something like the Grand Canyon, or are they unrelated, or is that the part of the question that you don't have the expertise for?
Well, okay, so at Novarupta, we saw that there was that natural dam, and then it breached the dam, and it literally carved that canyon probably in a matter of hours as that water is rushing through there. So that kind of gives us some indications. Now, when it comes to Grand Canyon, of course, there's the breached dam theory for Grand Canyon, right, where they believe that the floodwaters were actually trapped behind a natural dam, and we can actually make out the outline of where we think that giant body of water was, and then eventually that dam breached and then came through and carved that canyon very rapidly. So that's a model that many creation scientists have been working on. And so when you look at something at Grand Canyon, you go, well, that's a great idea. Is that a possibility? Well, I don't know. It happened at Katmai. It happened in the Katmai River Canyon there. So I think that adds maybe some validity that could be a good possibility of how that happened. Yes?
So when the video covered the different phases of the volcano's eruption and what was happening during them, what is that information based on? Because there probably weren't eyewitnesses to it.
Yeah, I think a lot of that was based probably on Greg's original research. And then after that, if you can imagine, a bazillion geologists descended into that area, right? And have been working there at that area for a long period of time. Now, Dr. Shorman actually traveled to a place on his second trip where there had been no humans. But right there, when we're talking about a lot of the deposits, of course, we've had geologists all over that area, right? So. Okay. I guess we're done. Thank you so much. God bless you guys.